men, generations apart, one an icon of the civil rights movement, the other a rising New York politician, Malcolm X and Zohran Mamdani, separated by 6 decades, yet standing on the same moral ground, and both, crucially, proud Muslims. Malcolm X wasn't born a universalist. His worldview was forged in the furnace of segregation and the black nationalism of the Nation of Islam, a movement that flipped white supremacy on its head, but still divided the world into black and white, oppressor and oppressed. For a man who had lived through Jim Crow, that binary seemed unshakable. Then came Hajj, a pilgrimage that shattered everything he thought he knew. He stood in Mecca and saw what America told him was impossible. Human beings of every color and language, blue-eyed blondes beside black Africans, united in worship, in ritual, in dignity, in humanity.
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. They had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam, perhaps it could do the same thing for him.
Hajj didn't just reshape his politics, it transformed his soul. Malcolm came home reborn, carrying a vision not only of black liberation, but of universal human dignity. America needs to understand Islam, he said, because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. He began to see racism not as an American sickness, but as a global system, a colonial network linking black Africans to Algerians, Ghanaians, Vietnamese, and Palestinians. In Zionist logic, he called Zionism a new form of colonialism, cloaking dispossession in humanitarian language. He was mapping an architecture of power that stretched far beyond the American South, an empire in motion. More than 60 years later, a young politician stands in a mosque in New York and speaks words Malcolm would have recognized.
I will not change who I am. I will not change how I eat. I will not change the faith that I am proud to belong to. But there's one thing I will change. I will no longer look for myself in the shadows.
When Mamdani entered politics, he was urged to keep his faith quiet, to flatten what might be too Muslim for American public life. It's a lesson many Muslims in the West have internalized. Ask for less, expect less, be grateful for scraps. But like Malcolm, Mamdani refused invisibility. The dream of every Muslim, he said, is simply to be treated the same as any other New Yorker. No more silence, no more smallness. Mamdani is 34, a democratic socialist, a long-time supporter of Palestinian rights, an unflinching critic of US complicity in Israeli violence. He said openly, if Netanyahu sets foot in New York, he'd order his arrest. Symbolic? Yes. Explosive? Absolutely. The backlash has been ferocious. Corporate and real estate interests have poured more than $22 million into stopping him, because Mamdani doesn't just represent a candidate. He represents a rupture in the old order, a generational shift that sees Israel not as a vulnerable ally, but as a rogue actor, with Palestinians on the receiving end of a brutal imbalance of power. This is why his campaign has triggered not just debate, but panic, because it signals something bigger than a mayoral race, a shift that can no longer be contained. Malcolm X embodied a politics the establishment could never tolerate, a fusion of Islam, universalism, and anti-colonial clarity. It wasn't his militancy they feared, it was his vision, the clarity of his internationalism. You can't have capitalism without racism, he said. His assassination in 1965 wasn't just the killing of a man, it was an attempt to abort a movement that threatened the architectural power itself. Mamdani faces a different kind of attack, character assassination, a smear campaign designed to turn his solidarity with Palestine into a crime, to turn his faith into a weapon against him. Because when power cannot co-opt a movement, it tries to crush it. When it can't silence the message, it defames the messenger. The same forces that once feared Malcolm's voice now fear its modern incarnation, proudly Muslim, fiercely internationalist, grounded in justice, unafraid to confront empire. And the battlefield is not in Tel Aviv or Gaza, it's in New York City, the city with the largest Jewish population outside Israel. For decades, support for Israel was politically untouchable, but not anymore. A recent poll found that 43% of Jewish voters in the city and 67% of those aged 18 to 44 support Mamdani. It's not just a crack, it's a generational rupture. Even Israel's own media is watching with alarm, because the question hanging in the air is simple. Is support for Israel still an asset in American politics, or has it finally become a burden? Malcolm X was among the first prominent black leaders to speak unflinchingly for Palestine. He saw in Gaza, which he visited, what he'd seen in Alabama: occupation, violence, erasure. The Palestinian struggle, he said, is not a religious war, it's a struggle against colonialism and for human rights. Mamdani carries that same clarity. Where others hedge, he names. Where others retreat, he stands courageously in the light. Both men trace their roots to Africa. Both draw strength from a global lens. Malcolm through Pan-Africanism, Mamdani through the legacy of his father, Mahmoud Mamdani, a towering scholar of colonialism and empire, a legacy that lives in him as history, as inheritance, as compass. Who would have imagined that 100 years after Malcolm's birth and 60 years after his assassination, New York would be bracing itself for the possibility of its first Muslim mayor? Malcolm X once said, "If you're not ready to die for it, put the word freedom out of your vocabulary." Mamdani says today, "I will find myself in the light." Two men, two moments, one current running through both of them, the stubborn, defiant pulse of liberation. This is not the afterlife of a movement. This is the movement, unfinished, unbroken, and advancing.